Hi, I'm Mohit Lally, President of Mindful Leader and your host for the Mindfulness at Work Summit. For this session, we'll be talking to Raj Sisodia. Raj Sisodia is Professor of Global Business and Whole Foods Market Research Scholar in Conscious Capitalism at Babson College and co-founder and co-chairman of Conscious Capitalism. Raj is co-author of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Conscious Capitalism. Welcome, Raj.
Thank you, Mo. Happy to be with you today.
Excited to have you with us. And before we jump into our session, can you give us, our audience, a glimpse into your personal life and how you got involved with conscious capitalism?
Well, so I've been in the US for many years, came in 1981 as a PhD student to Columbia University, became a professor of business. Um, but I always had certain reservations about the way in which business is talked about, thought about, and practiced. It felt very dehumanizing to me, very using people in order to achieve our goals rather than serving people. And certainly in my discipline of marketing, there were also a lot of challenges. So my dissatisfaction and unhappiness with some of those elements of business really led me to ask questions and explore alternatives and see if we can bring a richer and deeper and more human and more meaningful approach to business. And that dissatisfaction and asking those questions really ultimately led me to discover a better way that already existed. There's a set of companies out there that are embodying a different approach to business. And so that's what really led to that was a book called Firms of Endearment that came out of that research, and that then led to the conscious capitalism movement in partnership with the CEO and founder of Whole Foods. And then we brought in a bunch of other people into that. That's about 10 years ago that we actually started the movement. My work in this general area was about 13 or 14 years ago, I would say.
And I'm curious, why do you think that you were dissatisfied and so many others seem not to notice or care?
It's a good question. I've explored that myself, like why me and why have I been on this particular journey and why did I notice certain things and others did not? And I'm reminded of Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. And he talks about, how do you find out your essence, your purpose, why you're here on earth, really? And he talks about follow your bliss and also follow your heartbreak. What gives you greatest joy and what gives you greatest pain? And those things are accentuated for certain things for you, but not for others. That's a signal that somewhere in there, in between those things, lies your purpose. So, what gave me greatest joy was to see examples of deep humanity within business, where people were actually able to be human and not just be so-called professional and dispassionate and simply there, focused on the bottom line, so to speak. Um, I was moved to tears with some of the stories that we had in Firms of Endearment. I knew that there's some signal there that this resonates deeply with me. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, that which is deeply personal is also completely universal. So the fact that I was feeling that means that there are a lot of people that would feel that if they knew these stories. And then what gave me greatest pain was all of the evidence around us of intense suffering that results or is accompanied with our work cultures. The low level of employee engagement, of course, 25, 30%. Worldwide, only 15%, about 30% in the US. Uh, the overwhelming percentage of people who feel that they work for companies that don't care about them as human beings, about 88%. The fact that heart attacks are 20% higher on Monday morning. The fact that people develop all kinds of stress-related conditions directly connected with work. Jeffrey Pfeffer recently has estimated in his new book, Dying for a Paycheck, that about 120,000 people are killed every year, additional deaths every year in the US alone, simply from the way in which we work. And all of this is completely unnecessary. And in fact, it's unconscionable that we continue to inflict this kind of an experience into people's lives, because it then affects them and their children, of course, and generations to come. And it is not necessary for business to succeed for people to have to be this way or be treated that. In fact, quite the opposite. All businesses that we have looked at that don't do that and that actually consciously seek to enhance the lives and well-being of all the people they touch actually are more successful. They're more resilient, right? They're more, they grow at a faster rate. They have far greater loyalty, engagement, passion, commitment, creativity, etc. So there's no reason, in fact, no justification whatsoever to continue to do business in that old way.
Wow, and that brings us to the topic for our session. So we're going to explore this work that you're doing now around healing organizations, and I feel like there'll be elements of conscious capitalism also in our conversation. Uh, and to frame this, you were just talking about this old approach, and people often are treated as objects, and we don't really consider the impact of what we're doing on the planet. Communities are sort of on the side, and I'm curious why is that? Like, why how have we gotten to this point?
Yeah,
Before we explore where we go next.
it is an interesting thing to explore. I mean, if you look at the roots of modern capitalism, a lot of people would trace that back to Adam Smith, who articulated in 1776 through In the Wealth of Nations the fact that freedom leads to prosperity, that individuals operating according to their own best judgment about what they should be doing uh, are able to make decisions to fulfill their own passions and meet each other's needs far better than a government or a central planning authority can. So that prosperity is rooted in freedom and people pursuing their own self-interest, essentially the invisible hand of the market. So that became the driver, that freedom, and we saw that expressed initially in this country, in the US, more than anywhere else, and then it spread around the world, that idea. And it has led to extraordinary progress. There's no question that capitalism has delivered not only material prosperity, unlike anything we've ever seen, 1,500% increase over the last 2 centuries, but also life expectancy is longer, literacy is higher. There's lots of other elements of the so-called quality of life. So all of that has improved. But at the same time, there was a missing element there. Capitalism really did not have a foundation that went beyond that one pillar of self-interest. And the fact is that Adam Smith himself also gave us the other pillar. His earlier book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, 17 years prior, was about the human need to care. And that is an equally, if not actually more powerful drive than self-interest. As any parent can attest to, right? The well-being of somebody else can actually, overwhelm your own so-called self-interest. So that human need to care was left out of work. It was left out of business. Uh, and I've been thinking about it along the lines of the masculine and feminine, or the mother-father energy, because I wrote a book that was about integrating the need to bring more feminine into leadership in men and women. Actually, that's been suppressed and sidelined. And if you look at capitalism, in a way, Adam Smith was the mother and the father, because he had the father energy in self-interest, freedom, achievement, and then the other energy was the caring energy, which we describe as a feminine or mother energy. We neglected that mother energy, and we built capitalism on this one pillar. And that pursuing your own self-interest, when you end up with having a lot of power over other people who are trying to pursue their self-interest, leads inevitably to forms of exploitation. And therefore, worker conditions became really intolerable in many of these free societies that were rooted in capitalism, which then led to unions, militant unions, and the appeal of socialism, Marxism, and communism. None of those things existed before we had capitalism. They're all reactions too. Now, they're not the answer, right? But that's a symptom that something's wrong here. There's a polarity here that needs to be integrated. That we have, yes, we need the innovation and the dynamism and the creation and all of that comes with capitalism. But we also need the caring, the decency, right? That has to be combined, because if you just have one, it's incredibly unhealthy. So I think that's been the missing element. And I would say that the third element today is purpose. People, I mean, human beings have always been motivated by purpose, but for the fact is that for most of our history, 90 to 95% of us were struggling to survive. And that became our purpose, right? But today, fortunately, we live in a world where billions of people actually can think beyond survival, and they can think to significance, right? And to impact. And so I think today the third pillar is purpose. So it's purpose, it's self-interest, it's caring. So in a way, purpose, profit, and in a way, love are the pillars on which we need to build capitalism for the future.
That's beautiful. And I wanted to share, I had watched this really fantastic TED Talk by Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral economist,
Yeah.
and he's talking specifically about purpose. You might be familiar with it. And he said something that really struck me. If I could just read this real quickly. If you think about Adam Smith versus Karl Marx, Adam Smith had the very important notion of efficiency. He gave an example of a pen
Right.
factory. He
Right.
said pens have 12 different steps, and one person does all 12 steps, production is very low. But if you get one person to do one step and one person to do step two, step three, and so on, production can increase
Right.
tremendously. And to fast forward, he says Karl Marx, on the other hand, said the alienation of labor
Right.
is incredibly important to how people think about their connection to what they're doing.
Right.
If you make all 12 steps, you care about the pen, but if you make one step every time, maybe you don't care as much. And so, I've had the fortune of being involved in the software world. I've seen this specifically applied in software development, the sense of really enabling people coming from car manufacturing to the sense of like one person really seeing things all the way through,
Yeah.
and that impact on meaning and fulfillment and purpose. And a lot of folks out there are wondering, are we reaching that point that Karl Marx said, that we have abundance and that we're sort of reaching this critical point where the engines of capitalism are potentially going to drive us off this cliff? And so sort of we have that, we have sort of the stimulus and the conditions for the evolution beyond capitalism into something that he had envisioned.
Well, not, I don't think the diagnosis had much merit to it, but the prescription certainly did not address the challenge, right? Because, see, again, we're coming from a bipolar thinking, right? It's either this or that. Yeah, we need efficiency. I mean, that's, if we're not efficient with the use of our world's resources and our own time, then we're not going to really be able to uplift humanity to the extent that we need to. And there are ways in which we can try to have the best of both. So if capitalism doesn't evolve, then definitely we're going off a cliff. But if capitalism evolves, because it's rooted in freedom and dignity, and if we keep those in mind, those are fundamental, human aspirations and rights. And so any system that is not, that Karl Marx proposed, I mean, dictatorship of any of the proletariat, I don't care who's dictating. I mean, that's wrong, right? That is a form of slavery, and human beings are meant to be in freedom. And voluntary exchange has all the power. The minute you mandate something, it loses its moral power. I look for a way around it, right? I lose my self-governing capacity to make that same decision in a rational, caring way. So it has to be rooted in the elements that are at the foundation here of freedom and human dignity. But we need to evolve it. So the pin example, of course, a very simplistic example. Even making the whole pin probably wouldn't be very fulfilling after a week or so, right? It's just a pin. But the fact is, in most in conscious companies today, most employees are cross-trained, right? So the cashier is not just the cashier. When there's fewer people there in the supermarket, I was just in Spain at Mercadona. Everybody's trained to do 10, 15 different things as needed, right? It also prevents boredom, number one, and it also gives them the flexibility. So you don't have to send people home if there are not enough people in the car. You can have them do something in the back office, right? So there becomes a steady amount of work and keeps the work engaging. And beyond that, give people some autonomy in how to do it. As I forget who said it, but if the person who's sweeping the floor should be able to pick the broom and figure out the best way to do it, right? Don't tell them everything. There's a whole field of job crafting now that was created at the University of Michigan, the Positive Organizational Scholarship Group, as a structured methodology to actually have jobs fit people and not people fit jobs. Right, so there are needs that need to be met, and that's why we hire people. But we tend to put them in a box and say, "Here are your duties." How can we adjust that so I do more of what I really excel at and I love, and I do less of what I don't do well and somebody else loves? So there's a way. If there's an intention and a desire to care about people's experience and their growth and their flourishing, then we can do all these things. I was just in Wisconsin where we took a group of people to visit a company called Barry Waymiller. And I wrote a book with the CEO called Everybody Matters. And their mantra, and they've bought 100 companies that were struggling and dying. They adopt them, they don't buy them. They've never sold a single business. It's like adopting a child. You're not going to, at some point, say, we're done with you. And they've turned them all around. And they've done it by truly caring for people. Their mantra, which came out of an awakening that Bob had at a wedding, is that everyone is somebody's precious child. Every person is somebody's precious child. If my daughter is working here, I'm going to make sure she has a certain experience. If your daughter is working at my company, I'm going to make sure she's thriving. Well, everybody who works there is somebody's son or daughter. And why are we not doing that? So if you don't care, then that's what will result. If we care, then we're going to do these. And the more we do them, the more we realize that that's not only the right thing to do, but it's also great from the business perspective. It becomes a form of enlightened self-interest. When people are happy and flourishing and product and engaged and all of that, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things.
I want to pause. I think just what you said, enlightened self-interest. I think that is really fascinating because there's folks who are part of our community that, and a lot of folks out there that believe the problem is capitalism. There's,
Yeah.
self-interest, and if we just did away with it, or like that's the fundamental problem. But what you're proposing is, let's look at, the benefits of capitalism, and look at the evolution of it,
Yes.
and add this sense of caring and enlightened
Yeah.
self-interest, not just greed.
Yeah, exactly. Everything evolves, right? Everything evolves. I mean, what discipline hasn't evolved through, in leaps and bounds? Physics, chemistry, psychology, everything. Why is capitalism kind of frozen in time, with a sort of a misunderstanding of foundational principles to begin with, right? And again, even Adam Smith, I mean, he wasn't, God. I mean, so he had certain great insights, wonderful insights. But, there were some of his ideas also need to work. It's like the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, incredible. But are we bound forever by the words of a certain number of men in the 18th century? No, everything needs to evolve. So, and our human journey is one of rising consciousness. Our entire story is one of gradually awakening to our own divine potential and destiny. And for most of human history, most of us were in a survival mode where we were almost living an animalistic existence. We couldn't think beyond survival, which means you're short term and you're only focused on self because you have to, otherwise you die. But today we can focus beyond that, right, on others and see the interconnection and interdependence. The greatest element here is the interconnection and interdependence. And that's where consciousness also comes in, because there's all kinds of different ways to think about consciousness. I've been reading just lately about some of the reframings of it. We can think it's just each of us has our individual consciousness that's manufactured in a way by our own brains in some unique way. But there's another way to think about it, or even to open the possibility that just like gravity is a universal force field that exists, right, in the entire universe, and electromagnetic radiation permeates the entire. We can't see these things and we can't capture them and we can't insulate from them. Likewise, maybe there's a consciousness that's out there that is actually connecting all of us. It's all shared in a way, and then it gets, it's where our tuning fork brings it in slightly differently, and there's some individualization. But this notion of interconnection and interdependence at a fundamental systems and ecological level, which it is, the planet is one system. There's no there. I can't send my pollution to China and think I'm okay. So it's all one system. It all comes around. But also there's the interconnection, interdependence at a sort of a spiritual consciousness level, that we are connected. And we're starting to now be able to explore those things more, because we are, more of us by far than ever in human history, are able to operate beyond survival mode. We are in that exploratory mode, that we can think about these. I think it's, in that sense, a golden age for thinking about these things.
I'm curious, just one more sort of question around capitalism. There's folks out there that believe that just the way that capitalism is structured, it's sort of a self-fulfilling system, and so it's impossible to break out of. So if I try to do things, say, in a conscious way and in a meaningful, caring way, and the guy over there isn't doing it, and we're competing in this capitalist structure, he's gonna be more profitable, more successful, because the system encourages a certain type of behavior,
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna fail, and so the system sort of continues to perpetuate itself.
Yeah, that's a great fallacy. A lot of research shows quite the contrary. So my book, Firms of Endearment, we had 28 companies that we identified as fitting this pattern of the four pillars: higher purpose, stakeholder integration, conscious leadership, and caring cultures, which define the four pillars of conscious capitalism now. We found that in the long term, 10 years, they outperformed the market 9-1. okay, over a 10-year period, 5 years, 6 years, 15 years. It's all significant outperformance. Dozens upon dozens of other studies are now finding the great places to work consistently outperform. The most ethical corporations in the world consistently outperform. Companies that have two or more women on their board and more than 30% in senior leadership consistently outperform, etc. And it's not that hard to understand why. When the average company worldwide has 15% employee engagement, but a company that is built on purpose and caring for human beings has 70, 80, 90% passionate commitment. Well, it's all human energy that drives all activity on this planet, right? That we engage in together. Human, not physical energy, but creative, passionate energy. And that's elicited in far greater quantities and quality by enterprises that are built upon meaning and purpose and caring for people than traditional companies. I mean, this is just a reality. Customers are loyal, right? You don't have to spend billion. We spend $1.3 trillion in marketing in this country. We're trying to buy loyalty and trust. Well, guess what? You cannot buy loyalty and trust. That is earned through your actions, right? You're far better spending that money somewhere else, and actually investing in your people and investing in your customer care rather than just trying to convince people that, you've got the best. Employee turnover is a fraction. I was mentioning the Spanish retailer Mercadona. The turnover was like 2.5%. In the retail industry, its average is well over 100%. Okay, so you don't have to hire. Walmart has to hire 2 million people every year to replace those who leave. Costco turnover is 1/10 of Walmart's. People stay for 20 years. So there's tremendous productivity that comes with that. The longer you are there, you become an expert, right? So again, it's a great fallacy. The fact is, profit is like happiness. Okay. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, taught us happiness cannot be pursued. Happiness ensues. It is the outcome of living a life of meaning and purpose. And that comes from three things: doing work that matters in the lives of others, loving without condition, the human need to care, right? And finding meaning in our suffering. We cannot control what happens to us, but we do control how we respond. And we can respond in a way that actually takes something that seemed like a tragedy and make it into a triumph. So the same thing, profits cannot be pursued, profits ensue. They're the outcome of building a business on higher purpose, right? Which means doing something worth doing and that needs doing in the world, and learning how to make money doing that to make it sustainable and scalable. Building your business on love and care and not fear and stress. See, self-interest taken to its extreme leads to exploitation and therefore fear and stress. Corporate cultures are riddled with fear and stress on both sides. We use carrots and sticks, right? A lot of stress comes with trying to get that carrot, that bonus at the end of the year, and that fear of the stick. And that's how we think human beings, these sentient divine beings called human beings should be treated like donkeys. That's the animal that belongs between a carrot and a stick. That's what we do, right? So when you get away from all of that, you just see that human beings, they just bloom. I've seen in these companies in Wisconsin, these industrial towns all across the Midwest where Bob Chapman has literally saved the town. I was at a company in Phillips, Wisconsin, population 1,400 population in that town. They employ 600 people in this company. The entire town literally depends on that. This company was dying. That town was going to disappear. And Bob Chapman brought manufacturing back from Brazil, which they had sent away. He said, we're going to treat people, we're going to pay people fairly, treat them superbly, and compete globally. Right here in Phillips, Wisconsin, or wherever we happen to be. So ultimately, it's all about you take care of the people will take care of the business. It's kind of simple.
It's simple, but yet it's so, we've got quite a long ways to go. And I could think of like so many other factors that create pressures on CEOs and all the different market conditions and all the different demands. But I do want to move into this idea of healing organizations, because I feel like that's so fascinating. Right now, work is, the number one place for suffering. And so how do we go from that to creating healing organizations? I'm curious to learn more about what you're discovering on how a healing organization operates and what that could look like.
So there's three levels that we can be, right? So you have a business that can take healthy, whole people, relatively, healthy and whole to the extent that any of us are fully healthy and whole. Early in their careers, they come in, and then over time, what happens? They burn out, right? It's a real thing, right? Burnout is a real thing. Stress, they develop all kinds of stress related conditions. There's a long laundry list of diseases and conditions that are fed by stress, physical as well as obviously psychological conditions. And over time, people, get depleted. And then they have to go away and take vacations and, go to retreats and go to therapy and, do whatever they can to sort of restore themselves sufficient to come back and then again start the cycle. So that's kind of one mode. Then we could have a mode where people, are not stressed. I mean, the work is done in a way that actually keeps them at where they are, right? And that's obviously a big improvement over being hurt. But then you can take that to the next level. So it's like saying, if you take away the environmental side, right? There are companies that pollute, right? And they damage the environment, ecosystem, the carbon, everything else, water. Uh, and then we have companies in the middle today that are aspiring to neutrality, right? So they want to get to carbon neutral and water neutral, etc. And do no more damage. What about the damage that's already happened, right? If we just stop it here, is that enough? No, we need to reverse. So then I was just talking to a CEO yesterday from a company called FIFCO in Costa Rica, which is in the soft drinks and beer and other businesses related to that. And they went on a journey in 2003, not only towards carbon and water neutrality, but towards positive. So they are today water positive and carbon positive, right? So likewise, we can have companies that hurt people, companies that don't hurt but also don't heal, because those people have pre-existing conditions. And then you have companies that actually take people who have been broken, have been burned out, they are in a state of PTSD, essentially. That's what work creates. I mean, if you get laid off, in Phillips, Wisconsin, with this one employer, essentially, that everything revolves around, you have no fallback options, okay? Because all the other jobs are tied to that company. People were reduced to picking up aluminum cans and selling them to try to buy baby food, I mean, literally to that level. And these are highly skilled, machinists that were doing great work, but they got laid off for no fault of their own, right? So people are, and when you get a job back, it's like, oh my God, having been through that trauma, and if you don't know how to, you're going to buy food to feed your family, I mean, that's a pretty traumatic thing. So there are businesses that actually take people who've been through that and then over time make them whole, make them, healed. And not only them, but their children, their families, and their communities, right? And it's a multi-generational impact because you set in cycle, you set in motion a cycle. If you're going through PTSD, your children are going to have a version of PTSD and they're going to grow up, and what's going to happen to them? And they're going to, it's like victims of victims, right? We perpetuate a cycle of suffering. It all begins and therefore needs to stop at work. We have in our hands the power to stop this. We have, I believe, a moral responsibility to stop this because the human cost of doing business far outweighs all the other costs. Your labor cost, your material cost, your financial, whatever inputs you're tracking so closely, the human costs are immeasurable. Okay, those 120,000 extra deaths, where they're showing up on whose balance sheet? Nobody's accountable, right? And so we have to get there. This is not a nice to have. This is an imperative, and there should be a degree of shame associated with doing business in the old approach, the traditional, neoliberal, classic, whatever nice words we want to put on it. Okay, inherently that is dehumanized and it's brutal. There's brutality in that kind of business.
And just one comment I want to make quickly. There was recently a presidential nominee that in the process, what they mentioned was that this person created a hostile work environment. And it thrilled me to see people, before I feel like a lot of times a hostile work environment, like people are just so accustomed to that. But now that's being called out, that now that's becoming a liability, that if you're creating a hostile work environment, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, but see, where does all that come from? So I mentioned the whole Adam Smith and all that, right? But there's another element to that as well, which is that when we started to actually have corporations, right, large collections of people that are engaged and employed by a private entity doing things, we didn't know how to structure and manage and lead and organize all of that, right? So where did we turn? We turned to armies. Those were the only organizations large organizations that existed. So we not only borrowed the hierarchical structure, but the command and control style of leadership, but then we also borrowed all of the sort of operating system and language. So strategy, tactics, operations, headquarters, front lines, staff, line, these are all military terms. And this permeates our way of thinking about business. You go and look at the leadership section of a bookstore. Half the books are about leadership secrets of Attila the Hun, or how Alexander the Great and other empires, how they led. Well, guess what? They led by killing a lot of people in conquest. That's how they built their ego-based empires, right? So we have this whole militaristic origin. And you look at our language today, we talk about capturing, market share, targeting customers, right? We talk about shooting for this goal or aiming for that. It's permeated. It's amazing when you stop and actually start noticing. We need to move to non-violent communications about business because words matter. Words have energy in them, right? When I say that you're in my target market, I don't see you as a divine being to be served. I see you as a prize to be captured, right? There's a very different energy. When I have my employees, I essentially view them as soldiers, right? And competitors as the enemy, as opposed to, these are fellow travelers that we're all on this journey of creating value and serving each other together. And I can learn from my competitors. They are my teachers as well. That's how I grow. So there's a whole different mindset. Business has become so toxic. It has become so cold, so heartless. And it is where we spend the majority of our waking hours working, but then the rest of our hours we are impacted by other businesses and how they operate, right? So what we buy and what we, everything, it's all, our lives are permeated by the impacts that business has. And most of those are quite negative today. And so the opportunity here is tremendous for you and I, and we're fellow travelers trying to change this. And it's as you know, a deeply, deeply meaningful and satisfying thing. And yet at the same time, we have such a sense of urgency. You know, uh, it's later than we realize, and we are in a way running out of runway here because there are irreversible things that are happening. So we need this tipping point. I believe there will be at some point a tipping point which says this is like, how can you justify treating people as objects? How can you say that your business only has one purpose, which is to maximize? How can you even make that case? It's ridiculous on the face of it. So I want to get to that point where the inhuman way of doing business has to justify itself. Today, the burden and the onus of proof is all on the other side. You have to justify being human. Make the business case. There was somebody from Ford who had visited Barry Wimiller, and he said, they have Barry Wimiller University, and they teach people all these things about empathetic listening and things that make them better parents and better family members and help them at work. And he said, what's your return on investment on all of this? And Bob says, well, I don't have to justify that. I think it's the right thing to do. He said, well, we could never do anything at Ford. Our accountants would never let us get away with that. Just think about that, right? It's like I have children and I need to business case to do something that I know is going to involve them and keep them there. It's it's really gotten out of hand.
And at the same time, I feel people are relying more on work than ever for meaning, for purpose, and the time they spend there. That, in the past, that people were more active in other ways, whether it was church or community, but we've become
Yes.
we identify so much with our work.
We do. Work has become all consuming because, we keep laying off people and then increasing the work. Uh, but it's devoid of meaning and purpose for most people. And the people do still volunteer for nonprofits. They start, the number of NGOs in the world has been rising very rapidly because people are hungry for meaning and purpose. I mean, that's a fundamental human need, especially it also gets accentuated at midlife. The midlife crisis is real. It's a crisis of meaning and purpose. It's about transcending the material things that we thought were what success would be defined by. And by midlife, many of us have achieved a reasonable amount of that material success, and we feel hollow and empty.
And now there's a quarter life crisis too, so
Yeah.
it's happening even earlier.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so the millennials and others, have become more purpose-driven at a younger age than any other generation that we've probably seen ever. They're intelligent, they're informed, and they know, the situation that the world is in right now. That's a good news. The bad news is they think the answer is socialism. By majority, would prefer socialism to our system, free market system. And that's a real danger. This is not about throwing away capitalism, it's about evolving capitalism. Okay, it's about bringing the decency in with the dynamism. It's not about, again, polarities, right? So dynamism versus decency, right? Capitalism versus socialism, which becomes Marxism, communism. That's a tough choice. I don't want to make that choice. We cannot live without the dynamism. By the way, this is Jonathan Haidt's framing, when he talks about dynamism and decency. Without dynamism, we will perish because we can't meet our needs in the next 100 years for 9 or 10 billion human beings based on petroleum and all the other things that are going to be gone. Without that, we will not be here. But we need decency, right? We have so much suffering in the world. There's still 3 billion people living on less than $3 a day. So we need both. We need dynamism with decency. And the way to get there is by evolving capitalism, because again, it's rooted. We should take away capitalism, you take away freedom, right? And human dignity. You become a serf of the state, which is now handing out to you your basic needs. Well, I'm sorry, even if you get 3 square meals a day coming from the state, it's not going to satisfy human beings, the human appetites in the same way. So yeah, we need dynamism with decency, and it can be done. You are asking, if something exists, it must be possible. This exists in growing numbers, hundreds of companies all over the world. We have examples. So the fact that it exists means it's possible, and therefore it can be spread.
Absolutely. And Raj, in the time that we have left, I'm curious if we could explore some of the things that individuals, organizations out there of different size, and there's folks who might be watching this from higher ed, folks who are nonprofits, corporations, small companies. What can we leave them with that might help them move towards this direction and kind of empower them, regardless of what situation they might be in?
Yeah, so I think the principles and the pillars of conscious capitalism apply to any organized activity, right? So when we come together as a group, we need to have a purpose, a higher purpose, not just a purpose of survival or not just a purpose rooted purely in financials, but some reason why we exist, why we need to exist. So thinking about purpose applies for any of the universities need to have a purpose beyond, we're going to give you these degrees, right? That you get a job. I mean, it has to have a higher purpose. It has to be something connected to making the world better in some way. Being part of the solution and not part of the problem. Too many of our entities out there do what they're doing, but then they have all these so-called side effects, So they add to our problems. They don't actually help solve all of our problems. And then thinking everybody has stakeholders. We have stakeholders, in our personal lives, right? We've got family and children, all that. And every business has stakeholders. And you can consciously think about serving them and not using them. Traditional businesses use and exploit employees, customers even, right? They sell them stuff just to make money. Suppliers, certainly. The environment, right? They pollute. They so-called externalize these things onto society in the future. Think about each stakeholder as a vehicle of service. How do we serve our customers? How do we create value for and serve each of those stakeholders? Because when we do that, as we say, in order to win this for all the stakeholders, you have to give, right? And the more you give, the more you receive. It's again a spiritual, Saint. I think that's Saint Francis of Assisi's prayer, right? The more we give, but whereas if we come in by saying take, everybody starts taking from each other. Well, soon you deplete the whole system and it sort of bleeds to death. So the more we give within that system, the more the system thrives and grows and evolves and becomes richer and deeper. So I think these ideas are, as I said, leadership. Why do you want to be a leader? If the answer is rooted in ego and power and position and money, well, that's what, you're not a leader. That's a tyrant. You're going to use other people to achieve your personal goals. That's a tyrant. A true leader is there to serve. Are you there? Are you here to serve? Are you here to take these people to a better place? Whether it's in your university or your business or anywhere else or your country. If you're not coming from that energy, you should not be a leader. It would be a very dangerous thing. Unfortunately, many, if not most leaders ascend to positions of leadership because they are Machiavellian and hungry for power and they know how to work the system. The research shows that there's a much higher incidence of sociopathic, behavior, and not just behavior, but true psychological traits in people who are at the top of organizations, businesses especially. So we need leaders who are in it for the right reasons. Why do you want to? And then cultures. How does it feel to work here? We can create an environment. Even the most noble nonprofit can have a work culture that is toxic and filled with backstabbing, and and all of that, right? So how we work together, trust, fun, caring. Caring is at the root. Caring for people as human beings, caring for each other. So all of those elements are universal principles, not only across different forms of organization, but also across the world in different cultures. So this has resonance in a culture like Israel, as well as Portugal, right, as well as Costa Rica and Brazil and Australia have thriving chapters, and Spain, and I was just on the phone this morning with the Netherlands. They're starting their chapter, in Denmark. And these are very different societies coming from very different histories, right? Some of them socialist, some of them social democratic, some of them whatever it might be. But the fact is, this is a higher level integration of what human aspirations all over the world really have been aiming towards. People have taken different paths to try and get there. But I think these are universal. Again, we haven't created these. We've simply identified them, labeled them, and given them some kind of framework. This stuff has existed for 100 years at least. We have examples of companies. So, but when you coalesce it in that way, when you give it structure, when you give it a framework, when you give it a name, like the healing, when we've talked to certain CEOs and talked this, it kind of it's a form of identity refreshment, and it makes you more of who you are, because you're already doing this, but now you have a structure and a framing for thinking about it. And now you can take it to another level. You can consciously do that which you were doing unconsciously. There are a lot of unconscious, conscious capitalists in the world, because these are just decent human beings that probably listen to their mother more than they listen to their father. Right? And this is just now enabling them to become conscious capitalists. And there is a value to that, because then you're doing things, more thoughtfully and more systematically, and evolve it further. So that's, I think, what we're all about, right? All of us that are on this journey. So.
Raj, this has been fantastic. Every time I get a chance to connect with you and sort of experience your wisdom, it just energizes me and gets me so excited, and it's so valuable. So thank you so much. I think our audience is really going to appreciate this.
Thank you, and I appreciate what you're doing and the movement and the impact that you're having worldwide as well. I was happy to be part of the event in Washington recently, and look forward to continuing to have our paths commingle, and ultimately we'll all merge. We're all these little tributaries that are going to merge into a raging river at some point. And I think this is inevitable, but we just have to accelerate this transition, because as I said, there's a wonderful line in Hamilton, actually, the play Hamilton, which is all the rage on Broadway now, where Alexander Hamilton was in such a feverish hurry to write the Federalist Papers. He wrote 26 of them in 6 months. And the thing is, why do you write like you're running out of time? Write day and night like you're running out of time. You fight day and night like you're running out of time. And I think, in a way, we need that urgency, because he didn't know, but his life was going to end at some point, right? Very soon. But I do think that we have, there are people all over the world waiting to be liberated from the shackles of the old way of being. And if we don't do everything in our power to accelerate that, I think we have an obligation, really, to continue to do this at a deeper level.
This is great. So Raj, for people who might want to engage more and learn more about conscious capitalism or connect, what's the best way for them to
So
do
we have a website, consciouscapitalism.org, all one word and then .org. We have chapters now, I believe, in 35 US cities. So chances are that wherever your listeners are, they would find a chapter, and also 15 other countries and many others that are in the process of forming. I have my own website, Sisodia, one word.com, where people can learn more about me and see some of the videos and so forth on some of these topics.
it? Excellent. Well, that brings our session to close. I'm Moaj Lally, your host for the Mindfulness at Work Summit. Thank you for joining us.